Lunching yesterday on chicken and ichor, a house specialty at my favorite Midtown restaurant, I was forced to listen to a playwright acquaintance defend his latest opus against a set of notices that read like a Tibetan Book of the Dead, drawing tenuous connections between Sophocles' dialogue and his own. Moses Goldworm wolfed down his vegetable cutlet and raged like Carrie Nation against the New York theater critics. I, of course, could do nothing more than offer a sympathetic ear and assure him that the phrase, "a dramatist of zero promise," might be interpreted in several ways. Then, in the split second it takes to go from calm to bedlam, the Pinero Manquet half rose from his seat, suddenly unable to speak, frantically waving his arms and clutching his throat. The poor fellow turned a shade of blue invariably associated with Thomas Gainsborough. "My God, what is it?" someone screamed, as silverware clattered to the floor and heads turned from every table. "He's having a coronary," a waiter yelled. No, it's a fit," said a man at the booth next to me. Goldworm continued to struggle and wave his arms, but with ever-diminishing style. Then, as various mutually exclusive remedies were advanced in anxious falsettos by sundry well-meaning hysterics in the room, the playwright confirmed the waiter's diagnosis by collapsing to the floor like a sack of rivets. Crumpled in a forlorn heap, Goldworm seemed destined to slip away before an ambulance could arrive, when a 6-foot stranger possessing the cool aplomb of an astronaut strode to stage center and said in dramatic tones, "Leave everything to me, folks. We don't need a doctor. This is not a cardiac problem." By clutching his throat, this fellow has made the universal sign, known in every corner of the world, to indicate that he is choking. The symptoms may appear to be the same as those of a man suffering from a heart attack, but this man, I assure you, can be saved by the Heimlich maneuver. With that, the hero of the moment wrapped his arms around my companion from behind and lifted him to an upright position. Placing his fist just under Goldworm's sternum, he hugged sharply, causing a side order of bean curd to rocket out of the victim's trachea and carome off the hat rack. Goldworm came to a pace and thanked his savior, who then directed our attention to a printed notice supplied by the Board of Health affixed to the wall. The poster described the aforementioned drama with perfect fidelity. What we had witnessed was indeed the universal choking signal, conveying the victim's tripartite plight. 1, cannot speak or breathe. 2, turns blue. 3, collapses. The diagnostic signs on the notice were followed by clear directions on the administration of the life-saving procedure, the self-same abrupt hug and resulting airborne protein we had witnessed, which had relieved Goldworm of the awkward formalities of the long goodbye. A few minutes later, strolling home on Fifth Avenue, I wondered if Dr. Heimlich, whose name is now so firmly placed in the national consciousness as the discoverer of the marvelous maneuver I had just seen performed, had any idea of how close he had once come to being scooped by 3 still utterly anonymous scientists who had worked for months on end in search of a cure for the same perilous mealtime trauma. I also wondered if he knew of the existence of a certain diary kept by an unnamed member of the Pioneer Trio, a diary that came into my possession at auction quite by mistake, because of its similarity in heft and color to an illustrated work entitled Harem Slaves, for which I had bid a trifling 8-week salary. Following are some excerpts from the diary, which I set down here purely in the interest of science. January 3rd, met my 2 colleagues today for the first time and found them both enchanting, although Wolfsheim is not as tall as I had imagined. For one thing, he is heavier than in his photo. I think he uses an old one. His beard is of a medium length, but seems to grow with the irrational abandon of crabgrass. Add to this thick, bushy brows and beady eyes the size of microbes, which dart about suspiciously behind spectacles the thickness of bulletproof glass. And then there are the twitches. The man has accumulated a repertoire of facial tics and blinks that demand nothing less than a complete musical score by Stravinsky. And yet, Abel Wolfsheim is a brilliant scientist whose work on dinner table choking has made him a legend the world over. He was quite flattered that I was familiar with his paper on random gagging, and he confided to me that my once skeptically regarded theory that hiccuping is innate is now commonly accepted at MIT. If Wolfsheim is eccentric looking, however, the other member of our triumvirate is exactly what I had expected from reading her work, Shulamith Arnolfini, whose experiments with recombinant DNA led to the creation of a gerbil that could sing Let My People Go as British in the extreme. Predictably tweedy, with her hair scun in a bun, and with horn-rimmed glasses resting halfway down a beak nose. Furthermore, She possesses a speech impediment so audibly juicy that to be near her when she pronounces a word like sequestered is equivalent to standing at the center of a monsoon. I like them both, and I predict great discoveries. January 5th. Things did not get underway as smoothly as I had hoped, for Wolfsheim and I have had a mild disagreement over procedure. I suggested doing our initial experiments on mice, but he regards this as unnecessarily timid. His idea is to use convicts, feeding them large chunks of meat at 5-second intervals, with instructions not to chew before swallowing. Only then, he claims, can we observe the dimensions of the problem in its true perspective. I took issue on moral grounds, and Wolfsheim became defensive. I asked him if he felt science was above morality, and took issue with his equating humans and hamsters. Nor did I agree with his somewhat emotional assessment of me as a unique moron. Fortunately, Shulamith took my side. January 7th. Today was a productive one for Shulamith and me. Working around the clock, we induced strangulation in a mouse. This was accomplished by coaxing the rodent to ingest healthy portions of Gouda cheese and then making it laugh. Predictably, the food went down the wrong pipe and choking occurred. Grasping the mouse firmly by the tail, I snapped it like a small whip, and the morsel of cheese came loose. Shulamith and I made voluminous notes on the experiment. If we can transfer the tail snap procedure to humans, we may have something. Too early to tell. February 15th. Wolfsheim has developed a theory that he insists on testing, although I find it simplistic. He is convinced that a person choking on food can be saved by, his words, giving the victim a drink of water. At first I thought he was joking, but his intense manner and wild eyes indicated a definite commitment to the concept. Clearly, he has been up for days toying with this notion, and in his laboratory, glasses of water filled to various levels were everywhere. When I responded skeptically, he accused me of being negative and began twitching like a disco dancer. You can tell he hates me. February 27th. Today was a day off, and Shulamith and I decided to motor to the countryside. Once we were out in nature, the whole concept of choking seemed so far away. Shulamith told me that she had been married before to a scientist who had pioneered a study of radioactive isotopes and whose entire body vanished in mid-conversation while he was testifying before a Senate committee. We talked about our personal preferences and tastes and discovered that we were both fond of the same bacteria. I asked Shulamith how she would feel if I kissed her. She said swell, giving me the full, moist spray peculiar to her speech problem. I have come to the conclusion that she is quite a beautiful woman, particularly when viewed through an X-ray-proof LED screen. March 1st. I now believe Wolfsheim is a madman. He tested his glass of water theory 12 times, and in no case did it prove effective. When I told him to stop wasting valuable time and money, he bounced a petri dish off the bridge of my nose, and I was forced to hold him at bay with the Bunsen burner. As always, when work becomes more difficult, frustrations mount. March 3rd. Unable to obtain subjects for our dangerous experiments, we have been forced to cruise restaurants and cafeterias, hoping to work rapidly should we be lucky enough to find someone in distress. At the Sans Sushi Deli, I tried lifting a Mrs. Rose Moskowitz by her ankles and shaking her, and although I managed to dislodge a monstrous chunk of kasha, she seemed ungrateful. Wolfsheim suggested that we might try slapping choke victims on the back and pointed out that important backslapping concepts had been suggested to him by Fermi at a symposium on digestion in Zurich 32 years ago. A grant to explore this was refused, however, when the government decided in favor of nuclear priorities. Wolfsheim, incidentally, has turned out to be a rival in my affair with Shulamith and confessed affection for her yesterday in the biology lab. When he tried to kiss her, she hit him with a frozen monkey. He is a very complex and sad man. March 18th. At Marcello's villa today, we chanced upon a Mrs. Guido Bertoni in the act of choking on what was later identified as either cannelloni or a ping-pong ball. As I had foreseen, slapping her on the back did not help. Wolfsheim, unable to part with the old theories, tried administering a glass of water, but unfortunately seized it from the table of a gentleman well placed in the cement and contracting community, and all three of us were escorted out of the service entrance and up against the lamppost over and over. April 2nd. Today, Shulamith raised the notion of a pincers, that is, some form of long tweezers or forceps to extract food that falls into the windpipe. Each citizen would carry one such instrument on his person and be educated in its use and handling by the Red Cross. In eager anticipation, we drove to Belknap, Salt of the Sea, to remove a badly wedged crab cake from the esophagus of a Mrs. Faith Blitzstein. Unfortunately, the gasping woman became agitated when I produced the formidable tweezers and sank her teeth into my wrist, causing me to drop the instrument down her throat. Only the quick action of her husband, Nathan, who held her above the ground by her hair and raised and lowered her like a yo-yo, prevented a fatality. April 11th. Our project is coming to a close. Unsuccessfully, I'm sorry to say. Funding has been cut off, our foundation board having decided that the remaining money might be more profitably spent on some joy buzzers. After I received the news of our termination, I had to have fresh air to clear my head, and as I walked alone at night by the Charles River, I couldn't help reflecting on the limits of science. Perhaps people are meant to choke now and then when they eat. Perhaps it is all part of some unfathomable cosmic design. Are we so conceited as to think research and science can control everything? A man swallows too large a bite of steak and gags. What could be simpler? What more proof is needed of the exquisite harmony of the universe? We will never know all the answers. April 20th. Yesterday afternoon was our last day, and I chanced upon Shulamith in the commissary, where she was glancing over a monograph on the new herpes vaccine and gobbling a Mathes herring to tide her over till dinner time. I approached stealthily from the rear and, seeking to surprise her, quietly placed my arms around her, experiencing at that moment the bliss that only a lover feels. Instantly she began choking, a portion of herring having lodged suddenly in her gullet. My arms were still around her, and as fate would have it, my hands were clasped just under her sternum. Something, call it blind instinct, call it scientific luck, made me form a fist and snap it back against her chest. In a trice, the herring became disengaged, and a moment later the lovely woman was as good as new. When I told Wolfsheim about this, he said, "Yes, of course, it works with herring, but will it work with ferrous metals?" I don't know what he meant, and I don't care. The project is ended, and while it is perhaps true that we have failed, others will follow in our footsteps, and building upon our crude preliminary work, will at last succeed. Indeed, all of us here can foresee the day when our children, or certainly our grandchildren, will live in a world where no individual, regardless of race, creed, or color, will ever be fatally overcome by his own main course. To end on a personal note, Shulamith and I are going to marry, and until the economy begins to brighten a little, she and Wolfsheim and I have decided to provide a much-needed service and open up a really first-class tattoo parlor.